Hello and welcome again to Backpage. I'm Jody Seay, and today we're visiting with Bob Welch, who is a regional treasure here in the state of Oregon. And he's written a number of books. He never stops writing books, thank goodness. And this one we're talking about today is called Cascade Summer. So welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Jody.
Tell me about this. This was quite an adventure.
This is the only book that I've written where I had to go out and walk 452 miles for 26 days in order to gather the information to write it. But I just had a hankering to do the Pacific Crest Trail. I didn't think I could do the entire thing, 2,600 miles. I didn't have the time or probably the energy, but I decided to just bite off the Oregon section in the summer of 2011, inspired actually by a woman named Laura Buell, who back in 1999, I saw up by Little Belknap Crater. I had just done this little easy peak, and she was heading north, and I said, "Where did you start?" And she said, "You mean today or in the beginning?" I said, "Well, in the beginning." She said, "I started in Mexico." Whoa. And I said, "Where are you finishing?" She said, "Canada." And at that point I realized this was probably not the point where I wanted to beat my chest and brag about having just bagged Little Belknap Crater. Yeah. So I got to know her, and I said, "Oh, I'm the new columnist at the Register Guard, and I'd love to write a column about you when you complete your hike." And I did. Mm-hmm. And ever since that, I've just been smitten with the idea that there's a trail that runs along the spine of the Sierra Nevadas and the Cascades. And so I committed to doing the Oregon section with my brother-in-law, Glenn Peterson, in 2011.
So you called Glenn and said, "Let's take a month off and hike till our bones are raw"? Or
I'll tell you what I did. I knew that Glenn, first I thought I needed somebody really exciting and outgoing and talkative. And my wife said, "No, you want just the opposite, somebody quiet, methodical, maybe an Eagle Scout, maybe a physician." And I said,
just in case.
You know, so that meant my brother-in-law. And he liked the idea, but that wasn't good enough for me, because I'd read a book called the Cactus Eaters, about the PCT. You get water out of cactus.
Right.
In the southern portions of the trail. But anyway, and the guy said, never quit the PCT on your worst day, when you've got blisters, when it's raining, when you're really tired. Only quit after your best day, because then you know you really want to quit. You're not quitting for emotional reasons. And I liked that thinking, and I thought, that's what I need to apply to this. Who am I going to take as my partner? So I emailed Glenn 10 reasons why this is a really bad idea. And I got back an email that said this: "Count me in." And I knew I had the right partner, because he had considered all of the worst and still wanted to go. Because this was not, "Let's go fly fishing on the McKenzie." This was not, "Let's go over to Yachats for the weekend." This was, "Would you like to get up every morning for 30 days and hike 20 miles and then fall asleep and get up and put on that sweaty, smelly, stinky clothes and do it again?" So.
And he did.
And he said yes, and we were good friends at the beginning, and we were better friends at the end.
So, how old were both of you when you did this?
Well, I was 57. I believe he was 58.
So
we were old guys.
Yeah.
Real old guys. And the trail is a very young trail, I might add.
But you wanted to do it before you got too old to do it.
I told him, I said, every year that we wait, it'll just be that much more difficult. Yeah. And so and we committed to it an entire year in advance, because you need to get in physical shape. And so I did 2 months of P90X training, and then I just started hiking up every Spencer Butte, Mount Pisgah, Cape Perpetua, Mary's Peak, with 20 to 25 pounds on my back. I took 150 golf balls to the top of Spencer Butte, an 11-pound white elephant wrestling trophy to the top of Mount Pisgah, whatever I could do for weight in my pack. And then you have to trade in all your old backpacking gear and get lighter stuff. The irony of the PCT is to become a minimalist, which is what you're trying to do. You have to maximize your credit card at REI, which I did in a hurry. And then finally you have to do the logistics of where are we going to get the food, where are we going to get the water. So it takes a lot of planning and preparing to get ready for this trip. Now, I know that there are 23-year-old young men and women who decide at some party, like, "Let's go the next morning," and they do it and they make it all 2,600 miles. I know that happens, but for old guys like me, the only thing we had going for us was preparation and getting up early in the morning, because the 25-year-old hikers don't like to get up too early.
So I remember you talked about you ate a lot of freeze-dried food.
In the evenings, we would always have a freeze-dried dinner, correct?
But at one point, it became like tasteless. to you.
Yeah. The freeze-dried food actually maintained most of its flavor, but the other stuff, the Costco Svinhard Danishes that we would start the day with got a little bit old. I had bought the 60-pack. Yeah. And you know, after a few days that gets old. And then the tortilla wraps with the summer sausage and string cheese gets a little dry after a few days. And so, but you're burning 5,000 calories a day. You have to keep stuffing stuff in your body to keep going. So the second part of the trip, we did it in two and a half week swaths. The second part of the trip, we just frankly wound up taking more candy bars, orange slices, jerky, just anything to get calories in us and keep us going. So
you had trouble with your shoes, but it wasn't really your shoe that was the trouble. You're cutting a blister on your toes.
Blisters on the outside of my toes. You know, again, I had tried 3 different shoes over the year in preparation. I had read the entire book about how to survive long distance hiking and long distance running. I'd done all the research, but 5 miles into the trip, I had blisters. And so I never did quite get over the whole blister quandary. I wound up believing, I guess, in the end that even though I did get larger than normal shoes, I needed even larger. I wound up last summer going with a size and a half larger because your feet swell so much when you hike long distances, more than I assumed. So that worked for me. I wound up cutting the sides of my shoes off, or holes in them, and then wrapping them in duct tape after about 4 or 5 days. And
who was the guy? It was a fishing guide who...
Mike Jones at Shelter Cove, Odell Lake. He took one look at me and he said, "Stay there." And he went to his pickup truck and came out with a roll of turquoise duct tape. I mean, you already look geeky enough with duct tape on your boots, much less with turquoise duct tape. But Mike fixed me up, and I think he was a good representative of the type of trail angels that you would find along the way. Just people who would go out of their way to help you. We had a couple named Cisco and Roadrunner who had been hiking from Lake Tahoe, and they knew how to do snow. We knew we were going to run into snow. 2011 was one of the heavier snow years and a very a cool spring and early summer, so not much was melting. We didn't know that we were going to run into as much as we did, and so Cisco and Roadrunner kind of took us under their wings and showed us how to find trail in the snow, how to look for cut logs, knowing that in a wilderness area, if you see a cut log, that's the only reason that you would have a cut log, because of a trail, because they're not doing logging there. Look for a runoff from a snowbank, because that's usually a trail, and to spread out while looking for the trail rather than staying single file, because you can look for a 100-foot swath rather than a 20-foot swath. So they basically got us around Devil's Peak and around Mount Thielsen and through some of the tough snow.
Well, I was kind of surprised that the trail wasn't marked as clearly as I would have thought.
Yeah, I thought there would be blazes every 25 feet. Yeah. And because my brother-in-law, Glenn, worried a lot about, we're going to lose the trail. I said, Glenn, it's not like we're going to be the first people on it. There's going to be people that have come from Mexico. They're going to be ahead of us, and some section hikers ahead of us. Well, there were only a handful of people ahead of us, actually. And if they came through in the morning and it's 75 degrees out, their tracks are pretty well worn melted by the time you come by at 4 o'clock. So the tracks weren't as helpful. The blazes, you could go miles without a blaze. Now, if there's no snow, it's not hard to follow the 2-foot wide PCT. You pretty much can see it, except maybe on a side of a 3-finger jack where you're going through shale the size of computers or whatever. But when you get even a couple inches of snow, it changes everything in a way that I hadn't imagined.
Wow. Well, let me tell people about this. If you're just tuning in, I'm Jody Seay, and this program is Backpage, and we're visiting with Bob Welch about his new book, Cascade Summer. For all of those of you who are hikers, want to be brave and try the Pacific Crest Trail, this is a good book to know about that. Now, talk to me about Judge John Waldo.
John Waldo, yeah.
Because he's written about it a lot.
Yeah, the story is kind of a tapestry of our present-day journey and Judge John Waldo's late 19th century journeys in the Cascades. In the late 1800s, he would, for 26 straight summers, go up into the Cascades, hike around with his buddies, and keep a journal as they were moving from all the way from the Columbia River down to Mount Shasta. And he was ahead of his times in terms of being a preservationist, and he realized the gem that the Cascades were, and he said something's got to be done to preserve these mountains. The sheep are trampling the meadows, people are cutting down trees. He, with a guy named William Steele, basically went to the state government, and when that didn't work, went to the federal government and got protection for the Cascades, which became the forerunner of our wilderness areas. He's noted as the father of Oregon's wilderness, and deservedly so. So it was fun to be hiking along and see a lake or a mountain and know that Waldo had been here on August 17th, 1885 or something like that, and compare his story to ours. And
how did you find his story?
I'm a columnist at the Register Guard, and I remember I was actually looking for a book on Tom McCall, going through our library one day, and I saw this, the back spine, it said Judge John Breckinridge Waldo, and I opened it up and I thought, hey, this is the guy for whom Waldo Lake is named. And here was this typed journal that a Forest Service sociologist had in the 1980s, had taken his journal and transcribed it, typed it all up, and I was just amazed as I read this thing, very detailed recollections of his time in the Cascades. And I think that was one of the three things that drew me to the trail. Laura Buell was one, John Waldo was one, and just growing up with a father who fly fished and who hiked those high mountain trails, I think that was another impetus for me to go back to the trails, I think.
You know, I met a guy who's from France, whose name is Alexander Poussin, which means little chicken, apparently. But he and his wife walked from the Cape of Good Hope, all the way up to the Sea of Galilee. I mean, it's like 10,000 miles. And I said, why did you do that? And he said, so I could participate more fully in every moment of my wife's life. Okay?
Interesting.
But they had no money and no provisions, and every day they looked at each other and said, who will be our angel today? And somebody always showed up.
Yeah.
Like those people showed up to show you and Glenn how to get through the snow and how to find the trail and stuff like that. That's always kind of amazing to me.
They call it trail magic.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's maybe not present all the time, but there's an awful lot of cases where you're in need and somebody pulls through for you. There's at every stop where you get your food, say Hyatt Lake Resort, you could have your food mailed to you there. There will be a hiker's box, and you take the excess that you have, stuff that you don't need or you're tired of your bagels or whatever, and you leave them, and then people who come along the trail behind you, maybe they need that. And so you kind of help each other out. And one night at Shale Lake up by Mount Jefferson, we had we saw two headlamps gyrating in the darkness, and I was a little worried because earlier in the afternoon I'd seen the only person in the trail who really scared me, and it was a guy on a horse with a rifle in one hand and a 16-ounce Budweiser beer in the other, and that was just a bad combination. And I said to Glenn, I hope that's not the Marlboro Man. But and it wasn't. It was actually a couple from Israel, Bugs and Bunny. Everybody has trail names, and he introduced himself. I'm Bugs, and this is my partner Bunny. And could they stay with us? And of course they could. And so there's this camaraderie. And interestingly enough, the trail is very international, very, very national. We were called the Oregon Boys in part because it made us distinctive. I believe that there were fewer than a dozen Oregonians that we saw from the California border to the Washington border of the nearly 60 people we came across. Most were from out of state. I think 9 or 10 were from out of the country.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Now, Colorado Boys, for example, you know, I would always try to ask advice of every hiker that I saw, through hiker. And because I wanted to learn how to do this, and the Colorado Boys said, our advice is 10 by 10. And I said, 10 by 10, what do you mean? And he said, well, 10 miles by 10 a.m.
Really?
I thought it over. I looked over at Glenn. And I said, Glenn, let's just be the 2x4s.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to be kidding me. 10 by 10. But you know, the interesting thing about the trail is it becomes your teacher. It becomes your training. And so a month later, just short of Timberline Lodge, late one morning, I turned to Glenn and I said, stop. And he goes, what? And I said, this is a milestone. And he said, what? And I said, what time is it? And he said, well, 10 o'clock. And I said, how far have we gone? He looked at his map and he goes, "Whoa." I said, "We are the 10 by 10s." So you come a long way.
Yeah. So there was a kind of a bittersweet ending to the whole thing. There was a point at which Glenn got sick with vertigo and was vomiting and couldn't finish, and so you had to finish by yourself. But then, what happened after that? Did he do it finally?
Well, we went back last summer,
okay.
and two things had happened. Glenn had earlier in the trip, because of the snow, his daughters had joined us at Crater Lake, and they spent a day in the snow, and it was just no fun. They had 4 days to hike, and it was like cross-country skiing with really short skis. So Glenn took them down to around Diamond Lake and got out of the snow. So he came back last summer and finished that stretch from Crater Lake to Summit Lake. I had gone on with Cisco and Roadrunner, just the 3 of us. And so he did that section, and then the 2 of us went back and went from Timberline Lodge to Crater Lake because a fire had closed the trail. Labor Day weekend in 2011, the Dollar Lake fire closed the PCT from Timberline Lodge on to the river. So we wanted to do it the right way. And of course, then as it turned out, as we went around, they sent us around a reroute around the east side of the mountain, and that's when Glenn got sick. And that was a pretty harrowing experience because I didn't quite know what to do. You know, he's a doctor. I didn't know whether he was just, you know, if he really needed some serious medical care, if he was just trying to be a hero. We were in a pretty remote area. We were actually on a highway, but there wasn't much traffic. So do you try to get a ride into Hood River? Do you press the button on your satellite communicator to get it for SOS? So that was an interesting experience. And it was ironic because I always thought I would be the one that was going to get sick. And Glenn was going to be the one who took care of me. He's the doctor. I'm just the journalist, you know.
Right. But
things were different.
Yeah. And so what's happening now with your life? You've got more books.
I've got 3 books that came out within 6 weeks. I feel like, well, I can't say that I know how a woman feels like to give birth to triplets, don't get me wrong. But metaphorically speaking, as an author, I've given birth to triplets. And there's this book, Cascade Summer. There's Resolve, a book about a World War II soldier who eludes the Bataan Death March and survives 34 months in the jungles of Luzon. And then there's a book called 52 Little Lessons from It's a Wonderful Life. So if nothing else, I guess it sort of expresses how eclectic I am as an author, that I'm taking you to the PCT, to Bedford Falls, and to the jungles of Luzon all in the same season.
Well, you know, you're a wonderful writer, and I'm always touched when I read your books, you know, that when
Thank you.
The first 2 that I read were American Nightingale and Pebble in the Water. And I sent him an email and I said, "I'm a lumbering sack of snot and tears thanks to you." You know, and I hope you
that's the nicest thing, Jody, that anyone's ever said about my writing.
Well, it was the
particularly
truth.
with that snot word. I love that.
Well,
Thank you.
I was like, but it was so touching and so beautifully written, and I really want to honor the people who were what we call our greatest generation.
Right.
It's going to make me cry now.
Well, I don't,
anyway.
You know, people say, well, do you like to write about war? And I go, well, not particularly. I like to write about inspirational people, and sometimes that means the stage is war, and sometimes that means it's my brother-in-law on the PCT, and sometimes that means it's George Bailey in Bedford Falls in 1940. So I just go where the story takes me. I suppose somebody said you probably would have made a lot more money had you been like John Grisham and pretty much stayed in the courtroom or something like that. They say that if you play a really good solo on the banjo, don't come back and try to do a trombone piece then. Come back with a different banjo solo. And I've never done that. I go where the stories are. As a general columnist, I do that 3 times a week for the Register Guard, and my books have been the same way. And I've written about growing up in Corvallis and sports and life and fathers and sons, and because that to me is the totality of life. You're all over the place. At least I am.
Well, see, I'm a big believer in the power of our stories to change our world, and the reason is it's very difficult to stay angry at people when you realize you have more in common than not.
Right.
And beyond all of the religion and politics and all the cultural ook that divides us, we all crave love, we all crave connection, and we all want to know that our time here made a difference,
Sure.
that we mattered
Sure.
somehow.
It's the wonderful life theme.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. And so the stories that we share, and that's why we do this show, because it's so impactful when people can tell their stories really from that place of empowerment, you know?
Yeah.
And that includes the sad stuff
Yeah.
and the scary stuff.
Yeah, I think
And-
you and I are on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
I put out an e-newsletter every month called The Power of Words, and I do a beachside writers workshop, and we'd gather 50 people in Yachats, and we all have this kind of common theme in our lives, and that's this: we want to know the world we were here. We want to make it a better place, whether it's writing a family memoir or a whodunit or whatever.
Yeah.
We want to take our words and inspire people, or make them laugh, or leave them somehow different than when they first came upon our words.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's an egotistical thing any more than a really good chef wants to satisfy you with a meal. That's her way or his way of showing they care.
Yeah.
And so we all have gifts, and we just use them differently.
Well, I think the question to ask yourself is do you feel better after having read this book than you felt before?
Right.
You
right.
know? And I feel better every time despite the fact that I'm a lumbering sack of snot and tears, when I read what you've written, I always feel better because it's about human connection.
Well, I appreciate that.
And that really matters a lot to me.
I tried to, with Cascade Summer, my fear was that people would think, well, it's a travelogue. We got up, we went here, we did this. And I think I hope it's a story, and it's got some suspense, and it's got some lighthearted moments, and it's got some poignancy. It's got, I think, some themes about friendship and forgiveness. At one point, I realized early on in the trip that I am so intent on walking every foot of this PCT that it's become all about me. And when we run into Roadrunner and Cisco, there's some friction, and I'm the cause of it because I'm not looking big enough. I've said something that has hurt Roadrunner because I'm not thinking big enough, as it were.
Right.
And so once I faced who I was, once I kind of accepted that I was getting way too compulsive about this trip, as in regard to myself, I was able to really lighten up and relax and consider others and have a way better time from that point on.
Yeah. You know, the guy that I mentioned earlier, Alexander Poussin, he was telling me the story about one day they were with some African man, and he realized suddenly they were surrounded by a pride of lions. And I mean, they were going to be lunch. And the African man said, just do what I do. And they said, okay. And he goes, rah, and starts running at the lions, and they all scattered. And Alexander turned to the man and goes, so how'd you know that would work? And the guy said, I didn't know it would work, but what else could we do?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and you had situations like that too.
Yeah, I think that an adventure like this, it really it brings out the improvisation in you and ingenuity. And okay, now what do? Your feet you can't take another step. Your feet hurt so much. Well, you know, you cut holes in them, and you get the little plastic jam tubs from the Crater Lake restaurant, and you put those on there, and you wrap them so your foot has a way to expand, but you're not going to get dirt and pine needles in your foot. You know, you just figure out a way to make it work. And then there's the whole relational thing, because, you know, when you get a blister, you feel guilty. You're slowing down the other person.
Right.
But on the other hand, and you might say to yourself, well, Glenn seems a little bit too chipper today, and my mood is down. And so you have this whole thing, would I like it if he got blisters so he could be down at my level? And so you go through a lot of this mind game stuff, and you know, there's people would always ask me, did you have any meltdowns? And I had a couple of meltdowns along the way, not you know, throwing my trekking poles at Glenn, you know, throwing down my pack and stomping kind of moments, but just quiet, sort of, I think I'm at the end of my rope moments. And part of it for me was at one point when I was really hurting and tired, and we had just gotten into Central Oregon, which for me triggers all these childhood memories. The smell of the Central Oregon pine and dust brings back my moments with my father, who's been gone now for almost 16 years. And so I had this sense that I needed to walk a day by myself, and Glenn said, no, you know, we don't want to split up. And so finally I had to talk him into it, just say, you know what, you just need to let me do this. You know, we're 3 miles away from Cultus Lake, where I spent every summer for 10 years with my dad, and I just need to be alone. And finally he relented and said, okay, and it worked out fine. But
well, where can people get this book?
They can get it in most bookstores. They can get it at bobwelch.net, bobwelch.net,
okay.
and those are the two best places.
Okay,
So, yeah.
They can get an autographed copy if they...
If they email me, bobwelch.net, you can get one there. I know that in Corrales is at Grassroots and Eugene, and in a number of bookstores in Eugene, but online might be the best way to, particularly if you do want it autographed.
Okay. So what are you working on now? I know you just gave birth to 3 books in a row.
I've sent in a proposal for another book that I really don't want to talk about yet, because I'm not sure whether it's going to go or not. But for the most part, I'm just sort of going around and sort of promoting the 3 books, and then in January I'm going to go over to Yachats and just relax and watch and listen to waves and try to just not be busy. And then, but I'm sure that the writing bug, I hope by then I will have a contract for this other book, and I'll start out on that, because it's just kind of it's sort of an itch that you've got to scratch, I think, when you're a writer.
Now, who published this one?
This is AO Creative. It's a self-published book.
Okay. Yeah. How do you like doing that?
You know, it's.
Do you enjoy it?
It's the best and worst thing going. It's you get to make every decision.
Yeah.
You get all the freedom, all the power. But you also have all of the expense and all the hassle. You know, when the books ship and arrive, you're responsible for them. When you sell them, you've got to send a book to somebody. Right. And so the other 2 books are Penguin and Thomas Nelson, and so they do all that for you, which is nice. But you get a much smaller piece of the pie. So I think there's advantages to both.
Well, they're giving me the high sign, so we're going to have to saddle up and ride on out of here.
All right, Jody. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm Jody Seay. This program is Backpage. We've been visiting with Bob Welch about his new book, Cascade Summer, which you can get any place good books are sold, and especially bobwelch.net. Anyway, join us again next time as we take another peek at the back page. And remember, we're all in this together. More the same than different. Do your best, because he always does.
Thanks so much, Jody.
Thanks, Bob.